Hey guys, Josh and Pops, we're back here with another Alaska Highway video for you. This time trying to decide between whether you should drive the Alaska Highway or the Stewart-Cassiar Highway.
But the short answer is you got to do both of them. They're both incredible in their own way.
That is absolutely true. You should do both of them if you can. We recommend doing the Alcan on the way up, as it's just cool to drive that and arrive in Alaska, and the Stewart-Cassiar on the way back down. But that being said, we wanted to talk a little bit about the differences between the two drives so that you can make a decision if you can only do one of them. Man, we nailed that intro first try.
There we go.
All right, Pops. First up, which was more scenic?
It is easy to argue either way. They are both absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about it, I think about that drive, that detour we did on the Stewart-Cassiar that took us down to Hyder, Alaska. That was one of the most beautiful drives I think I've ever done in my entire life. That short section, it had glaciers and waterfalls and massive mountains. And I mean, it was just like, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. It was such an incredible drive.
But the Alaska Highway at the same time, my gosh, how could you not just be incredibly overwhelmed with the beauty? Muncho Lake, for goodness sakes, one of the most gorgeous places I've ever seen. So it'd be easy to land either way.
Campground right before too was,
oh my gosh,
it was incredible. Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, you can't really go wrong. Like, it's picking a favorite child to pick which one is more scenic. All right, Pops, next up, which one's better if you want to learn about history?
Well, you guys know from watching our videos that I'm always really into the history of the places that we visit. If you went on either route, the kind of First Nation people history is fascinating, and there's lots of opportunities to see it right up close, whether it's historical stuff or current day stuff. Fascinating. But because we were focused on the Alaska Highway a little bit, we were particularly interested in the development of that and how it was built and how it was planned. And if you're aware ahead of time of the things to look for, it really makes that road come to life. But even if you don't look at the history, it's incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, so definitely the Alaska Highway is better for the sheer amount of history, as there's so many museums along the way. We went to 7 or 8 museums and didn't really even get to see them all. So if you're interested in history specifically, it's probably better to drive the Alaska Highway. All right, next up, which one of the drives is better if you want to see wildlife?
Well, I mean, from our experience and when we went into this, we were thinking because Stewart-Cassiar was so much more remote that we'd be seeing wildlife like crazy. And I would suspect you typically would. But just for our trip, we just happened to see a ton of wildlife on the Alaska Highway, everything from bears to bison and everything in between. It was a fascinating chance to see wildlife.
Yeah, our tally was like 12 different bears that we saw, which is something that you would have never have thought of. But just to show how different it is, it's like we didn't see any wildlife when we were in the Yukon. So, you know, you could come in and you could see tons of wildlife on Stewart-Cassiar, you could see none on the Alcan, or vice versa, or like us, we saw all of our wildlife in British Columbia and none in the Yukon. But I would have to say that based on what I've read online, Stewart-Cassiar is probably better for wildlife. Just wasn't for us on our drive.
So just piggybacking on the last comment, you could wonder which of the two is the more remote of the highways?
Both of them are pretty remote and have some pretty remote sections. That being said, Stewart-Cassiar is definitely more remote overall than the Alaska Highway is. There is a lot of fewer towns and services and places to eat along that stretch of the highway, where the Alaska Highway, generally when you wanted there to be a gas station, there usually was a gas station. Whether or not it was open or accepted credit card is a completely different topic, but it was generally there when you expected it to be. Stewart-Cassiar, there's like 2 major areas where you can guarantee there's going to be gas, and outside of that, you just really never know. So you kind of have to prepare for that remoteness.
And even just the highway itself, the Alaskan Highway is much more developed, whereas Stewart-Cassiar is much more like a back road.
Yeah, like a 2-lane kind of road where it's harder to pass. It's very easy to pass on the Alaska Highway. It's a completely different experience, but if you're asking which one's more remote, probably Stewart-Cassiar.
Another question that someone might ask is, which of the 2 routes is the longer if you're just thinking of traveling north to south or south to north?
Yeah, so the Stewart-Cassiar is actually 100 miles shorter in terms of actual length than the Alaska Highway is. The remoteness, the 2-lane road, how windy it is, it actually is about the same amount of time to drive if you're doing either one of them. So I guess it basically just depends on where you're coming from. If you're on the West Coast, most likely you're gonna go up and go through the Stewart-Cassiar. If you're on the East Coast, you're probably gonna go through Icefields Parkway and Banff and Jasper and then go up through the Alcan.
But the thing about it for us was that Both had their uniquenesses, but I have to admit we were both incredibly surprised by Stewart-Cassiar just because of the remoteness of it and the extra bit of time that it took to travel the same distance.
Yeah, and we're talking about that like specific section, which is Stewart-Cassiar. If you're driving from, the West Coast, you're gonna have to go way up through British Columbia and across through Prince George before you get into some of this beauty that we're talking about.
One thing you could wonder is if you're choosing between the two of these, you're gonna miss something. And so the question is, what are the kind of things you don't want to miss?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question because they kind of connect about 40 miles outside of Watson Lake. So from there on, it's basically the same. Going through Whitehorse or Carcross or Tok, that's all gonna be the same either way. However, if you're choosing between the two, going up the Cassiar Highway, you would get to see, the Hyder-Stewart area that we were talking about with that detour, which is one of the most incredible things we saw on the drive, like overall. And then if you're going up the Alaska Highway though, you get to see Muncho Lake, you get to see the Liard Hot Springs, you get to see the Signpost Forest. So those are kind of the three top things, with the hot springs being something that people come from all over the world to see. Those are kind of the main trade-offs between the two.
But you also want to do that research that we've talked about already. If you're a person who's interested in First Nation peoples, there could be particular groups that you are especially interested in the history of, and that could be a critical kind of point in making that decision as well.
Yeah, and we also have our top 20 spots, so if you want to see like what we thought was the best, you can see that video up here as well. All right, Pops, to finish it off, Stewart-Cassiar or Alcan, if you had to pick one?
I'm going Alcan, just because of all the history I'd studied beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, for me too, it's like the Stewart-Cassiar was amazing, but if I had to pick one, I probably would do the Alcan too, because it's just more iconic way to drive to Alaska. But do both of them if you can.
But I gotta say, Stewart-Cassiar is gorgeous again, so it's once again hard to make sure that everybody knows that, and how do you choose is hard.
Yeah. But hopefully that made it as clear as mud for you, right? Let us know if you have any questions specifically on this, and we'll see you on the next video.